Hey, Green Future Growers, welcome to Season 4. I'm your host, Jackie Marie Beyer. I'm here to help you create, grow, and enjoy your own organic oasis. I hope you'll subscribe for free on iTunes or your favorite podcast app, and let's get growing. Now, where are you located?
I'm in central Pennsylvania near Harrisburg.
Oh, cool. I'm originally a New Yorker, but I have been in Montana for, I don't know, 30 something years now, since I was 21. So basically my adult life.
Wow. Is
And
that where you are now?
I am. I am.
Okay, awesome. Very nice.
And I read a book about Montana when I was a little girl and was like, I'm going to move there when I grow up. And then I got Montana
Oh,
license
no way.
through
How
high
cool is
school.
that?
It's super cool. And not only that, like, I like read the book when I was a kid, but then when I moved here, like I just got a map out and I was like, all right, I want to go where the trees are. And it turns out like the little girl, like the town that supposedly she was near is like pretty close to us. Like I got really close.
Yep.
So anyway, super fun. All right. Well,
So I've got your questions pulled up. No problem. Tell me a little bit about your audience so that I know how to tailor these questions.
Okay. Well, I call my audience green future growers. I am one of the here. I probably could put my video on for a second.
Yeah.
Kind of embarrassing. Hi.
Hi.
Um,
Good to
and
meet
then
you.
oh cool. All right, I'm gonna turn off. And then so I call them green future growers because we're all kind of dedicated to growing a not just a garden, but like caring about the environment and growing like a greener world type of like, one of the questions I get a lot is what do I do about my neighbors? So people that are passionate about the environment as much as growing fruits and vegetables. Of course, my listeners have told me numerous times, don't forget, we really want to know how to grow the best tomato or how to grow the best, zucchini or whatever.
Right.
But they are interested in landscapes and flowers. Like I've always kind of dreamed of being a flower farmer. I like to grow a lot of flowers. Definitely more so like if I ever do go to market, I'm sure I will go to market to sell flowers more than that. Like I feel like so my 7-year anniversary was just January 29th, and I used to call
Congratulations.
myself
That's awesome.
thanks. I used to call myself the organic eater because my husband was really the gardener, but I've really learned a lot about growing vegetables, but they definitely take a lot more energy, care, than
Oh, I bet. What's
and
your
I'm
last
big on
frost?
herbs. Our last frost can be anywhere from the end of August to the beginning of September, generally about September 8th. We
Okay.
have had a frost. Oh, and when can you start? Our last
Yeah.
frost in usually like right after Memorial Day, like first week of June
Okay.
is when you can
So
start putting
so
things in the
your
ground.
last frost or your last frost is not too different than mine. Our last frost is typically May 15th, but then we have a much longer growing season because my first frost will then be, you know, I would say late September, mid October sometimes. So we have about an extra month to grow than you do, almost 2 months.
And that makes a huge difference.
Major.
All right, let me introduce you before we drop any more golden
Sure.
seeds.
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Welcome to the Green Organic Garden. It is Tuesday, February 1st, 2022, and I have an awesome guest on the line. Her blog is garden.thoughtfully.com. She's in central Pennsylvania. So here to join us today is Heather Andrews. Thank you, Heather.
Oh, Jackie, thank you so much for the invite. It's so nice to meet you and your
I
audience.
know, right? It's fun to meet other people. Well, go ahead and tell listeners a little bit about yourself and like your blog.
Sure. So I am a Southern gardener who has moved to the Arctic Northeast of Pennsylvania. We've had a very cold winter so far. We are, for the very first time, out of single and double digits here today, actually. So I'm super excited because I understand this is the equinox between winter and spring is today. So we're halfway done, guys. We're almost there.
Really? Oh, that's good to know.
Yes, I'm
'Cause I
super
feel like
excited.
this year, our winter is never going to end. Like I went out to feed the birds this morning. It's so icy. It's
Yes.
just been like a really lot of not going out because it's super icy. And then I'm
Yes.
going to be quiet.
Yes. So obviously this is the time of year of seed catalogs and planning, and I'll actually be putting some seeds today, starting some seeds because I have an upcoming seed class here with a local nursery. Because certainly, as you know, food has gotten very expensive. And during pandemic, gardening became the number one hobby in North America, and that continues today. So I became
Yes.
interested in gardening as a little girl. So my granddaddy Andrews always grew an acre garden for myself and my 12 cousins and I. So we ate out of that garden in the summertime, but he was a beekeeper too. And he used to tell me that when his bees did well, his garden did well. And I sort of filed that away in my little brain. And when I moved to the Northeast and married my husband, imagine my surprise when our last frost date is May 15th. And all of a sudden, I'm having to figure out how do I grow things with a much shorter growing season. And I remembered what my granddaddy Andrews taught me, and I started putting pollinator plants in my garden, not realizing that not only would I have the benefit of butterflies and all kinds of visitors to the garden, but that it would make a bumper crop. And that first year, Jackie, I was calling my neighbors, going, if you don't get over here, I am going to ring your doorbell, leave a bag of groceries, and run away. I don't know what I'm going to do with all this food. But I'm a clinical researcher by day. And ironically, the clinical data supports putting pollinator plants in your garden. You can increase the yield by up to 30%. So I love to teach people how to grow food sustainably, to grow more food, and to do it without chemicals so that you can support more pollinators. So it's a win-win in a lot of different ways.
Oh my gosh, golden seeds. My listeners are going to love you. This is exactly what they want to hear. How to increase their yields by 30%. And I'm so like I always have been thinking like if I write another garden book, it is going to be about pollinator borders. And I tried to grow one last year and well, technically my husband ended up doing most of it, but it was not anywhere near as successful. So I'm super excited, especially since we have like fairly similar seasons and your learning curve has been kind of the same. What is a what does that mean?
So I've been in the medical device industry for 22 years. I still consult in the industry, but the latter part of my career has been revolving around clinical trials. And so I have been exposed to clinical data as part of my job for many, many years. And I help companies bring their products to market. So I work with really innovative technologies, mostly in the cardiovascular space, but in some other spaces too. And I love being able to take really complex data sets and make it immediately accessible for the gardener. So I'm surrounded by teaching universities that are focused on agriculture, like Rutgers University, for example, that put out fantastic pieces of information. And you might not know, but Pennsylvania is one of the bread baskets of the United States. We have the ninth largest county that grows food in the country without water. So we're blessed to have lots and lots of rain. And our Amish community, Lancaster County, grows a significant amount of food for the Eastern Seaboard. So I love that I am surrounded in 15 minutes in any direction I can drive and I can be on a farm.
Oh my gosh, I love all of this. So what kind of degree do you have to get in that field? Like, is it a medical degree or statistics or like,
So my
I'm
degree's in
so
psychology,
fascinated.
ironically, but I think it's great because I work with doctors all day, right? And I can honestly say I'm married to one, and there's a lot of psychology in working with physicians. I love them. They are amazing people, and they work very hard, and I can tell you they care a lot about their patients. But I have to convince them to work with me to do clinical trials. And and then the companies, because I have this long relationship with a lot of these physicians, I'm able to help them choose physicians that might want to participate and have their patients participate, obviously, as well in the clinical trials. So but when you're looking at data sets, especially when you're looking at research, how do we make it so it's understandable to the home gardener? How do we make it so that you can take actionable items out of that data and put it to work in your own backyard? And that's what I really love to do. So I do a lot of webinars with book authors, and then I'm also a professional speaker for a lot of different garden clubs and arboretums and other professional organizations. I'm also called to be a expert witness for a lot of townships in this area, because there are a lot of people like you, Jackie, who would like to grow more food in their backyard, who would like to have pollinator gardens, and they may live in a neighborhood or in a township that won't allow that because, quote unquote, it looks messy. And I help change what messy and what garden should look like. I change perceptions. And, what I find is
Like
that,
with like an HO, like would regulate or like who would be in court over that?
yeah, unfortunately, I mean, even in my own neighborhood, there are rules about what things should look like. So I live in a pretty formal neighborhood, but I find that if you give your pollinator garden structure by creating walls or barriers, or to say this is not weeds, these are flowers. And the majority of my pollinator garden, for growing food, where I have the food combined with the flowers, is in the backyard. But I experimented a bit last year, and one of my neighbors feeds our deer. Now, I'm not going to say I agree with that, but the deer had put corn, or someone, a woodland creature, had planted corn in one of my front beds, and I realized what it was. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to let it come up and let's see if anybody says anything. And actually, the neighbors really found it very funny that I was growing corn in the front yard. But I tell them I didn't plant it; it just grew. But I love to put decorative vegetables in with my garden, and make it look very appealing. But also, the beauty of doing that is that a lot of these flowers are complementary to the food I'm growing. And so they can act as distractions or trap crops. And so I have a lot less pests that I am dealing with. And I have a genetically compromised pet, so chemicals are not an option in our yard.
Oh, I love all of this. So I just have to ask, did the corn actually produce like cobs of
It,
corn?
it did. I had corn, but it was not the kind of corn that you would eat. It's considered here feed corn. So once we cut the stalks down, I just left the corn out for the critters. But I mean, it was very cool looking to have corn in a very formal garden.
Well, how big is your place where you're at?
I'm sorry, say that again.
How big is your place? Like, is it a house or a farm or
So I live in
like
a
is it a yard?
house. All of these houses sit on a pretty good size of land. So I have about 1 3/4 acres with a creek with a wood lot. So I have a little tiny forest behind my house that separates me from the next neighborhood. So the beauty of that is I grew up where we had a ton of woods beside our house. In the 1970s, my parents, now I can completely appreciate it because the interest rates were in the teens at that time. But a developer was going to come in and develop that land, and my parents bought it at that very high interest rate so that it couldn't be developed. So us neighborhood kids could grow up in our own little tiny forest. And so during pandemic, Jackie, that was my solace. We were second most locked down behind the state of California. My husband being a frontline healthcare worker, you can imagine how terrifying it was every day when he would leave for work and they didn't have enough PPD, meaning masks and protection equipment. That forest really became my solace because I couldn't go anywhere. And I would go out and hack at all these invasive plants. The benefit of that was I was rewarded with this carpet of spring ephemerals, which are tiny little flowers. It literally just because I removed all these invasives, all these beautiful little flowers came. And those tiny flowers are super important as our native bees, which we have over 400 here in the state of Pennsylvania, wake up and they need something to eat. And the first thing they look for are those flowers.
How did you know what to cut down?
Well, in our area, pretty much if it's got color this time of year, it's usually not native. So there are vines that are, climbing up the trees. So those typically are not native vines. We also have other invasives that have invaded our woodlands, like non-native roses that were used by the settlers when they first came here as fencing for livestock. That's very obvious because it's just covered in thorns. So I created a giant pile of that, which the birds then use for housing. And then I also had a lot of things like barberries. So barberries are not a native plant, highly invasive. Now we have gotten them banned for sale here in Pennsylvania. But I would say if you go in any yard in this neighborhood, it was a very popular landscape plant about 20 years ago. Unfortunately, it has berries on it. And those berries get deposited by birds in places you don't want them to grow. And it's very difficult to eradicate them. But this time of year, they're one of the only things in the forest that have color. So I know what it is. And we recently had volunteers in one of our big state forests near here called Michaud remove 8 acres of this invasive plant. So there's a misnomer, Jackie, that, well, it's not going to leave my yard. That is completely wrong. So what we try to do is educate gardeners about native plants that would be an acceptable alternative, but also can be a host plant for many native butterflies.
So what are some examples of those?
That's a great question. So if you're looking to grow food, elderberry is a great one for your butterflies, but also your birds. It makes a great syrup that will keep you well in the wintertime too, if you can get to those berries before the birds do. I also love one that is, trying to think, I know it's called Diablo, is the common name of it, but it is, I have to think about the name of that one, Jackie. I'm blanking on it. But
that's all right.
there
You
are
think for a sec, because I was just gonna say that elderberries, like I feel like I've seen like an upsurgence in elderberries the last couple of years because they're so full of antioxidants and they're really good for you, right? And they help boost your immune system, which is like great against COVID.
And the flu.
Things.
The flu is also, they have done clinical trials on elderberries and it can be used as a preventative. So I just keep it in my fridge. I order it because my birds, they eat them all. I very rarely get elderberries, but that's okay.
Love your laugh. That's awesome.
I grow them for the birds, not for me. But there are other native shrubs that I love too, that not only look really attractive this time of year, like winterberry has lots of bright red berries that look great against the snow, but are really important carotenoids and fat sources for birds this time of year. So I really try to educate people too about why you want to leave your garden standing this time of year. What a lot of people don't realize is those seed heads are nature's bird feeders, and so super important for the overwintering birds. But in addition, I don't recommend cleaning up your garden. Today, down in North Carolina, where my parents live, my mom's like, "Oh, it's 70. I'm going to go out and clean up the garden." I'm like, "No, not yet," because it's not consistently over 50 degrees. And the problem is that the majority of your pollinators are sleeping in that leaf litter, as well as in those stalks of your perennial plants that have been left standing. So until your temperatures consistently reach 50 degrees, let the garden sleep and let your next year's butterflies, fireflies, and native bees stay in that leaf litter. Don't clean it up just yet.
Awesome. That is great advice for sure. Um, so Heather, tell us about something that did grow well this year.
Oh goodness. Let's see. So I did a really cool technique this year that I had never done before in the past growing season. I used a technique called no dig gardening. Do you do that, Jackie? Are you familiar with that concept?
I am familiar with it. We're working on it slowly, getting there.
Yeah, so no dig for your audience couldn't be easier. Certainly, when this house was built, one of the challenges of many houses being built is the topsoil is removed. And so, on part of my backyard, it is really hard packed clay. And it is very difficult to dig into. So, I have a lot of raised beds on that side of the yard for that reason. But I wanted to try Charles Dowding, who is an English gardener, and his weather's quite similar to central Pennsylvania. I wanted to try his no dig technique. So it's real simple. You just save your cardboard boxes, obviously, remove any staples or any kind of tape, non-slick cardboard. And I have 4 cats, so lots of chewy boxes come to my house every day. And then you overlap those boxes and you add compost, not soil, compost. So I had 6 inches of compost brought in, and I spread it over the boxes, left myself a little walking path. And I put my garden in there. And I used a really cool system from Trellis and Fence, which is made out of galvanized steel. And I grew more tomatoes in that system than I've ever grown in my entire life. My cherry tomatoes got 16 feet tall in that system. It was insane. And I had well over 1,000.
That's crazy.
It's totally crazy. And I had over 1,000 cherry tomatoes on 2 plants. So I'm going to say that went swimmingly well. But keep in mind, Jackie, that I plant for pollinators. So I surrounded those plants with borage, which is an herb, super easy to start from seed, beautiful and edible, but the bees went berserk over that plant. They loved the borage. I also had a really old-fashioned flower that, again, grew from seed. And I like rareseeds.com. I don't know if you've ever ordered from them. That's the Baker Creek.
Baker Creek. Yeah.
I love those guys. So there were some just gorgeous flowers that I grew from seed from them. And again, I'm blanking on the name of that one. And then I surrounded my plants with herbs. So, just like you and I have friends, plants have friends. So basil and tomatoes go together very well. I grow calendula, which is a huge, huge benefit for a lot of different pollinators and medicinally, there's a lot of reasons you can use calendula. And then I also grow nasturtiums, and those are edible and again can act as a trap crop for keeping and confusing the bugs. So what I found with no dig was several things. One, it was a lot less maintenance. I didn't weed that garden once, not once. So I don't know that I'll ever grow a garden any other way. Two, I found that the cardboard stays moist. So while we had a good rain year last year, I was not having to water so much. And three, I used a very ancient technique with olas, which are these clay pots that you bury underground and then you fill them up with water, and then it has like a little lid that goes on top. And that kept my roots of my tomatoes watered all the time. And that just seemed to be the trick.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to try that.
Yeah. So if you've got a local potter, you just need unglazed clay, and you can ask them to make you an olla. And if you go to my Facebook page or my YouTube channel, we have videos on all of the things that we just talked about. So happy to.
Is your Facebook page at Garden Thoughtfully or at Heather Andrews?
So my Facebook page is The Thoughtful Gardener, and the YouTube channel is Garden Thoughtfully. So it flips around. This started, Jackie, as just a way to get out of my head. I had a coach that was like, you need to do something other than work. And she's like, what do you like to do? I'm like, I love to garden. So I started shooting videos in my garden with my cell phone 4 years ago now. And not realizing that there were a lot of crazy butterfly people out there like me. And I completely blame this on the master gardeners of central Pennsylvania. They were the ones who told me about milkweed. And I put that in that first year vegetable garden, and the caterpillars ate it to the ground. And I'm like, okay, now what do I do? So I started shooting videos of them eating and turning into chrysalises and then turning into butterflies. And all of a sudden, like 25,000 people are watching these videos. And I'm like, what is going on here? So this completely started by accident, but clearly, it's become a passion to share what I'm doing so other people can grow more food and provide habitat for wildlife.
Can you tell listeners, explain what a trap plant is? Because I don't know that anybody's actually talked about that before, like specifically. Like I've had some people talk about how like they ended up with one, but like, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So essentially what a trap plant is designed to do is just to confuse a predator, right? So for example, flea beetles would be a great example of this, where they like to eat a lot of vegetables early in the season, in my case. But if I plant radishes, they are attracted to the radish leaf and they'll eat that, which is not part of the plant I'm going to eat anyway. So I really don't care. So that might be an option to plant in. There's a fantastic book on this. If you're interested in this concept, Jessica Walliser has written a really fantastic book called Plant Partners. And I am a huge fan of her. She's a delight to talk to, and she's got great information. But I have used a lot of her techniques in my own garden, planting things like alyssum, which again just distracts the insect long enough that perhaps it's masking the smell of the plant that they would normally eat. But I find that I just don't have a ton of plant damage. Now, the only, I would say, frustration from a prey standpoint that's frustrating to me, I have a groundhog that thinks everything in my garden is quite delicious. So he and I constantly have tussles. But he's part of the ecosystem, so he gets to stay. I just grow more food for him. I did have some issues with cabbage whites as well, which is a little tiny butterfly that loves to lay eggs on things like cabbages, and anything leafy green like kale. So what I do in the mornings when I go for a walk with my garden supervisors, the cats, I will take a plate with me and I will just pluck those off, and then we take them to the bird feeder. So nature's hot dogs, the caterpillars are loved by the birds. So they know that I'm out there doing that for them. And within 5 minutes, they're completely gone.
That is the best story. I love that. Everything from the cat supervisors to Jessica Walliser, I feel like changed my life last summer. I read her book about I don't know if it was the plant partners, but I think it was one about like the bugs in your garden.
Yes,
And I
and she
just
just re-released that, by the way, just like I think this week. So she's updated
awesome.
that.
I should reach out to her again and see if she wants to interview them because she was just I just like I don't think I will ever go to the garden again and not look at bugs differently and not appreciate so many more of the beneficials and be able to identify the different beneficials and like all of a sudden dragonflies look, I was just like, oh my gosh, look at these dragonflies, and like seeing how many different ones there were. Like before I would always think there was just like one type, and just a huge change. And I love all that. I can't believe you got 16-foot cherry tomatoes. That is just
I couldn't either.
insane.
It's
Where did they
insane.
grow up? Like, were they just
So
self-supporting, or like did they have?
that's what's
16 feet is like three of me. I'm 5'3".
yeah. So this system is really cool. The uprights are over 6 feet tall, and then you just continue to add these cattle panels to the uprights. So
Oh.
as the plant grows, you can continue to add up. So they just exceeded over the top. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. But what I will say, we have terrible downdrafts here in the summertime. We get these straight line winds, and I've tried every tomato cage on the market, and they all fall. It's just inevitable. This is the first time I've put a tomato cage in using this Gardens Trellis and Fence system, and they're based out of Maryland. And you might be able to ask your local Ace Hardware because it's in the system, but maybe they can carry it for you. But the problem is that these systems, and I feel like I've tried every tomato cage, literally, they will collapse under the weight of the plant or with the wind. But these suckers didn't move. In fact, I've left them up because they're galvanized steel. I didn't feel like I needed to bring them in this winter, and they're waiting for the next year's tomatoes and cucumbers to be planted.
I feel like that is like a big secret that everybody got into last year was those galvanized steel cattle type panel things. So I'm even going to try them this year for our grapevines. I'm just
Yeah.
curious about your groundhog. Like, if like, does he not bring in friends, and don't you end up with more groundhogs if you don't do something
So,
to keep him out?
yeah, definitely he is hanging out in the garden. My house is made out of stone, and there was some leftover stone when this house was built. And so um, I don't do the heavy lifting around here. I do have a landscaper that helps with things like, doing tree, trimming and things like that I shouldn't be on a ladder doing. But he saw this stone. He was like, I think I could build you some extra walls, because he knew that I had pretty poor soil on the far side of my house. And so he put these stone walls in, and yeah, the groundhog moved right in. He just has a nice little house right in my stone walls. And but I'm in the garden enough that we have a lot of critters backing up to a creek and to this small tiny forest, and we have deer and we have skunks and possums and raccoons, some squirrels, bunnies, and tortoises for sure, and a bear. I have had the bear come into the garden twice. He's really not that interested in me whatsoever, but birdseed or those berries look delicious. He'll eat those. But my
Do you
husband thought
have bees? Do you
I
have a
don't.
beehive?
No
Do you
bees.
have the native bees?
Yeah, so like we talked about, we're really blessed here in Pennsylvania to have over 400 native bees, and they're such a huge part of our ecosystem. Even in my own garden, I have ground dwelling bees. The majority of our native bees live in the ground, and if you were to walk to my pollinator garden, I don't have any mulch or straw or anything where I know they live. They bury themselves down in these nests in the ground, and they're not aggressive. But they're super duper important because I have some that are just tiny, tiny, tiny little ones, and I have some that are the size of a $50. They're just massive. And people will come and visit, and if they're not used to being around bees, sometimes they'll get really scared. So I'll warn them,
Yeah.
like, look, these are native bees. They're collecting nectar. They're super not interested in you. I've never had anybody be stung from our native bees, and they are really super important. Here in Pennsylvania, we produce $1 billion in apples a year. And what they found is that in our orchards where they put pollinator hedgerows, which is basically native plants and annual native flowers, that the crop is significantly more. So this research keeps coming back with other types of fruit, like watermelons. This study has been done in Clemson University down south. And what they find is that the fruit set, when you put in these pollinator strips, is better. In other words, more visitation from more pollinators. And it is a significantly larger haul of fruit versus a beehive.
Golden seeds, Heather. This is awesome. You have no idea how much I love this because I love the pollinator strips and just the flowers and bringing in the native bees and in your garden, like how you get along with your animals. How about something that didn't go the way you thought it was gonna this year?
Oh, well, like I said, we had a lot of rain, so I usually have a really good crop of cucumbers, and I just think it was a little too wet for the cucumbers, and they just didn't do well. I think I will probably move them back up towards the house. Again, I have a lot of stone and stone walls, and I feel like the other issue is that the soil is not warm enough for the cucumbers. And then I fight the groundhogs too in the lower gardens. They don't tend to come up closer to the house. So I feel like if I'm going to do cucumbers again this next year, I'm going to definitely put them in the stone beds. I feel like the stone radiates more heat too, and those cucumbers like it hot. So I think that's one thing I will definitely do differently for next year.
This is the part of the show we call getting to the root of things. So, do you have a least favorite activity to do in the garden? Something you got to kind of force yourself to get out there and do?
Least favorite activity. Oh, wow. Um, let's see. I would say that, I'm not a huge fan of like major pruning. I would say that I probably need to get better at it. And I would say least favorite probably is just like the heavy lifting stuff. So I try to recognize as I get older, there are things I like to do and there's things I don't like to do. So one of the things I will do when I'm cleaning up my garden and so forth is leave piles, and I let my landscaper guys, who are big burly guys, pick those up and take them down to my compost bins, because it's just a little too heavy a lot of the time for me to try to do. So, I think it's important that you realize your limitations and you don't try to do everything. And if you're looking for a great ergonomic gardening book, I'm a huge fan of Tony Gattoni. She's got a great book on like gardening at any age, and gardening gracefully, and realizing as you get older, you got to be smart about what you try to do in a day, making sure you wear sunscreen, and making sure you wear proper clothing, and drink enough water, and sit in the shade. And I like most gardeners, once you get out there and you get going, you try to do everything. And so I just have to get a little better at being like realistic about what I can do as one individual in a day, and not try to do it all.
I love this. I'm gonna get that for my husband for Valentine's Day. Um, so on the flip side, what's your favorite thing to do in the garden?
I mean, anything related to the butterflies is just totally up my alley. I, love to try to figure out how to invite more of them into the garden. And, it's just such a delight to see them. And fortunately, I work from home, so I do try to get out. And my garden supervisor, Cookie, is also the human walker. She loves to take her human for a walk. So she will remind me when I have been in the office for too long and I need some sun, to get out and to spend time with her in her garden. But it's always a changing environment out there. And like you mentioned about Jessica's book and looking for the bugs, there's always something really interesting going on. Different visitors, whether it's a tortoise or whether it's a dragonfly, or different types of bees, wasps, butterflies. It's just such a treat to be able to watch them. And I recently learned that there is a healing vibration that the bees give off when you are in the garden. And I didn't know about this phenomenon, and I need to read more about it to understand it. But beekeepers are one of the longest living professions.
You mean like people who are beekeepers live longer than other people? Or
Apparently
like,
so.
cool.
Yep.
I
There
like
seems to
that.
be something about their vibration that resonates with us. So,
I'm gonna
I
look into
need to
that
know more about
too.
this.
So Heather, what's the best gardening advice you've ever received?
I think that, when I get questions about pollinator gardens and how do I do this and so forth, I want you to think about that, you know, just like if I invited Jackie to my house and I want her to stay for the afternoon, I need to offer Jackie something to eat and maybe something to drink. But if I just have one type of food, maybe I've picked food that Jackie doesn't like. And so it's really important to think about your garden as a symphony of blooms. And we want to offer your pollinators lots of different highly nutritious food to eat. And I'm not talking about butterfly bushes. Yes, butterfly bushes attract butterflies, but the reality is that that's like feeding junk food to your kid all day. It's not high value food, and that's not a host plant for them whatsoever. So I really want to think about getting and embracing your natives and putting in keystone plants so that you can grow more food. If you ate today, thank a pollinator. 1 out of 3 bites you take is courtesy of a pollinator. And I'm a huge fan of the National Wildlife Federation, who has, in conjunction with Doug Tallamy, who's a world-renowned entomologist that happens to live here in Pennsylvania and teaches at the University of Delaware. he talks about that, we are part of the solution. Nature is not over there somewhere. 85% of the land here in the United States is privately owned. So if I was to give you any advice, which I have obviously implemented in my own backyard, which is, we need to create our own wildlife parks in our own backyards. And we can do that by partnering with organizations like National Wildlife Federation, who have a great guide where you just put in your zip code for the native plants that are most beneficial to the wildlife in your area.
Oh my gosh, you just like golden seeds just like fall out of your mouth like it's like syrup or something. I don't know. Just so I'm so glad you booked this talk. How about a favorite tool? If you had to move and could only take one tool with you, what could you not live without?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would say the thing that I have learned, because I have a tendency to get very excited when I'm in the garden and leave things everywhere, which is really annoying. I have an apron that I got from New York Sky and Company. It's like a black, heavy duty, waterproof apron that is like a combed cotton. So the water just rolls straight off it, but it's got all these pockets. So I can keep my phone in there in case I want to take a video of something very quickly. I can also use it this time of when it's garden time. I tend to listen to a lot of books. So the book that allows me to listen to something while I'm working. And then it's got all my little pockets, so I have all my little tools in there. But it will say my favorite tool at the moment that a friend gave me for Christmas is called a root buster. And I am, again, no dig gardener, but there are times that I need to lever something out of the ground. And this thing is crazy. It's just amazing. I love it.
Who makes that? Do you know?
I don't know the
Like
name,
just Google
the
root
answer to
buster?
that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Root Buster, and it was given to me as a gift. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure who is the manufacturer.
Cool. You know what I do? I paint mailboxes so I can keep my tools in a mailbox in the garden
Oh my
because
gosh,
it
I
drives me
love that idea.
crazy to
So great. So
to
great.
I'm always like getting down in the garden. I'm like, oh, where are my pruners? If I just had my pruners, I would dedicate those flowers right now, or I would do this. And then I go back up
Yep.
to the house and then I get, stuck doing something else and then I forget. And then it's the next day and I go back in again. So I like to just keep my pruners or like the sprinkler because my dog has like a plastic fetish and she chews anything plastic. So I'll put the sprinkler in there at night or just I have like
Great
a
idea.
small amount of tools that I keep in this one string for tying things up for like the tomatoes. Um, just like some twine, some hemp twine that we have, and just I love that. But I love the apron thing. And remember, listeners, my good friend Decia from Simply Josephine makes beautiful aprons. That would work good for that. How about what's next? A favorite recipe you like to cook or eat from the garden?
Oh my goodness. Well, when the garden is really producing, there's not too much that makes it in the house. I will say this last year, I grew a cherry tomato called Sun Gold, and that was literally like eating candy in the garden. They were the sweetest cherry tomatoes and a little larger than a standard cherry tomato. But my favorite thing to do is wrap that in a nasturtium, which is sort of peppery. So you get sort of this spicy plus sweet at the same time, which is super yummy. But I have a friend who is also an author who's written a book called Eat Your Roses. And I bought her cookbook, and it's all about cooking with flowers. And so I'm super excited. We got my husband for Christmas an ice cream maker. So we're going to make some rose ice cream next year.
Oh man, that sounds good. I'm gonna look her up and see if she'll do an interview with me.
Yeah.
I love to eat flowers. Nasturtiums are the best. That sounds so good. A nasturtium around a cherry tomato.
So her
How
Facebook page is Mrs. Know It All.
oh shoot.
And she's a character.
Awesome. How about a favorite internet resource? Where do you find yourself surfing on the web?
Yeah, so because I'm a YouTube producer of content now, I will say I spend a lot of time on YouTube when I'm trying to research a topic. Um, and then I'm a master gardener too. And I will say your master gardeners are great sources of information. And some of the master gardeners do a great job with putting up things that are super helpful. The Allegheny County master gardeners here put up a lot of really great content that I follow. But in terms of learning, again, I highly recommend Charles Dowding's YouTube channel. I just find, first of all, he's like the Mr. Rogers of gardening. He's just very pleasant to
I
listen to.
love Charles Dowding. He is my all-time favorite YouTuber, sure for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I just find that what he says is so true. For us, getting that temperature of 50 degrees soil temperature is really tough. And the compost beds in the no dig garden have really made it easy for me to get my transplants going early in the season. And so I'm hoping now that the England has opened back up, I'm hoping to travel there this year. And there's a very
Me
famous
too.
garden competition I like to go to called Chelsea that I've been to before. And then I have a really, really good friend who lives just outside the city, and she loves everything that I do: cats, coffee, and gardening. So we eat cake, go see as many gardens as we can, and visit her cats. So, I'm hoping though to actually attend one of his courses at Homeacres. And so it is on the docket. We're just, waiting for that confirmation that, there's not going to be any, quarantining or anything when I get there. So if that's the case, then I'm off to England in May for sure.
Sweet. I was just looking at tickets because I have a friend who's over there and she's like, you can come stay with me if you come. And there was, but have been looking, and there was one Airbnb that was like, you have to have proof of like necessity for travel.
Mhm.
But the others weren't. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm hoping they're gonna open up too and maybe get to go and see Charles Dowding. And then there were like a couple of other people that I did interviews with last year that are there. And then I even just did one I haven't released yet for listeners, of a woman who's down in Brighton, and she was like, you have to come. And then also, like, coincidentally, my podcast hosts, the people that do my podcast, are there. So I'd love to hook up with some other podcasters.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah. So, how about a favorite reading material, like a book or a magazine that you can recommend?
So I highly recommend everybody get a subscription to the American Gardener. That is free with your membership to American Horticultural Society. And the best part about this free membership, other than their very beautiful, very, very helpful quarterly magazine, is that you get a Reciprocal Gardens program that you will be, as a member, a recipient of, which means that you can visit any garden in North America that is part of their reciprocal program for the cost of the membership to American Horticultural Society. So for 25 bucks, it's the best $25 you'll ever spend, because most of your garden admissions are going to be at least that. And you'll see there's hundreds of gardens online, as long as it's 90 minutes from your front door, that you get to see it for free. And some of them, even that are closer than that here, will let you come. But with Pennsylvania being the garden city, we have lots and lots of public gardens. And so this is like an amazing subscription for the value that you get. And they really got hurt during pandemic, and they're now a 100-year-old organization, and I really hate to see them go away. So I hope everybody will consider maybe chipping in a few dollars to them so that they can continue their great work.
Oh my gosh, Heather, you have been such an amazing guest today, sharing resources that I know my listeners are going to love, a lot of ones that we have not heard before. Just great information about pollinators. So, before I ask my final questions, or anything that like we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
So I am partnering with Gardening Know How. It is a wonderful resource as well online for everything related to gardening around the world. But we are putting out a butterfly course, and that will be coming very soon. And if your listeners are interested in how to do some of the things we've talked about on this call today, which is grow more food and be able to grow a no-dig garden, but specifically to attract and host the monarchs, which are the royalty of the garden, I'd love for them to join us in that journey. And so you can go to Gardening Know-How and let them know that you're interested in the course. And once we have it ready, I'd love to join them. And then they can learn even more tips and tricks over a 5-week course.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Heather, tell everybody how to connect with you one more time.
Great. So on Facebook, I'm the Thoughtful Gardener, and we put tons of helpful content there every day. I also video blog my garden during the garden season. And this time of year, I'm talking about tools and books and things that we did last year, what worked and didn't work. So we'd love for you to join us and join us on our YouTube channel, which is Garden Thoughtfully. All of the rest of them are all Garden Thoughtfully. So happy to meet your listeners on surfing the web. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Jackie, to be able to talk to your audience.
Oh my gosh, thank you for coming on and sharing all your amazing knowledge and just everything you talked about today. I know listeners are going to love this because you just have a really eloquent way of explaining everything, but also you just drop like knowledge. Like it's just incredible. I feel like just how much we've learned from you. And that's part of why my show, I mean, that is why my show has been such a great success, but I don't feel like I hit as many awesome interviews last year as just you today. So just
It's my
keep up what
pleasure.
you're
We have to
doing.
do this again and during the growing
Yes.
season and talk about what's working and what's going on. I certainly am very appreciative to be here and to talk about my passion, which is obviously creating habitat for the monarchs. I think a lot of people in the West heard the sirens call last year when the monarch count that they do every year on Thanksgiving in the West almost was so small that they barely could count any monarchs. But people really got busy and planted milkweed and other nectar plants. And we saw a huge resurgence this year of monarchs that are overwintering in the Pacific groves. So yay, gardeners. And certainly, if you're interested in learning more about that, I encourage you to go to Monarch Watch and you can start to report the journey north as they start heading your way.
Oh my gosh, you just never stop sharing great information. And that I feel like it's leaving our interview on like the biggest positive aspect of hope that we can do this, because one of my first interviews was with David, it's not Solomon, but anyway, he was number 70, I'm pretty sure. And he talked about like the monarch should be like the mascot of climate change and just the environment and gardeners, because they were going extinct, and there was such, and so anything we can do to try to help them, and to hear that there is help coming, that things are working, is just so wonderful. So
it's really, I would say, one of the best things I think that has come out of pandemic that we can point to and say, okay, this worked. But there are over 35,000 waystations, including mine, Caterpillar Haven, right here in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. But there were additional 5,000 waystations added during pandemic. So while people were home, they started converting parts of their lawn or maybe small businesses as well. But it's just really super impressive to see that people are thinking differently about what constitutes what a great lawn might look like. And instead, getting rid of the 4 million acres of lawn that we have here in Pennsylvania, and instead creating what I'm calling pollinator corridors. And you can register your waystation, whether it's a wildlife waystation or a butterfly waystation, on Get on the Map, which is, again, Doug Tallamy's work, but they have GPS satellite pictures, and you can start to see where the pollinator gardens are, and more importantly, where they are not. And maybe work with your city or town or your neighborhood to create a monarch mile. So I'm going to leave you with that and see, maybe we can talk about this topic again, but really excited to see that people are making the monarchs more habitats so that they can continue to visit our gardens and delight us.
I love that. Thank you so much, Heather. Gardenthoughtfully.com, right?
Yes, you got it. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Take care.
Want to donate directly to the show? You can buy me a cup of coffee where your donation goes directly to support the Green Organic Garden podcast. It helps pay for things like hosting the MP3 files, maintaining the website. It's super easy. I'll put the link in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening.
Do you know someone who would benefit from the Organic Gardener podcast? If you like what you hear, we'd love it if you'd share the Organic Gardener podcast with a friend. Thanks again for listening, and remember, grow local.